everyone, this is Jess Bloom from sunny Summery, Sydney in Australia, and you're listening to 22 West Radio.
We are 22S Radio, the next wave of K-Beats. 22S Radio is 22smedia.com and 88.1 FM KKJZ HD3 Long Beach, Los Angeles. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Golden Spotlight. I'm your host, Rob Flores. At this time, I would like my guest to please introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Carmen Varela, and I'm the Director of Disabled Student Services Office here at Cal State Long Beach. Thanks for having me, Rob.
Oh, cool. So the first thing I like to do is start off as early as possible is, tell me about life growing up. Did you grow up with siblings as well?
So I'm originally from Texas. I grew up in El Paso, which is a border town. It borders Mexico and New Mexico. And I was one of 5 kids, so I had 4 siblings, 3 sisters and 1 brother. Grew up in a working class community on the border in El Paso. Went to high school there, and then left at about 27. But that's kind of where it all started. My mom is an immigrant from Mexico. My father's Native American. His family's from New Mexico. And so I'm a first-generation student, first-generation person here. And so, yeah, it's kind of where it started.
Wrong button. Once again,
You start again? Yeah, okay.
just for those of you who are tuning in, once again, I would like my guests to please introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Carmen Varela, and I'm the Director of Disabled Student Services here at Cal State Long Beach. Thanks for having me, Rob.
Excellent, excellent. So tell me about life growing up. Did you grow up with siblings?
So I actually grew up in El Paso, Texas, which is in the Southwest. I have 3 sisters and 1 brother, so that was 5 of us. Grew up in a working class community. My mom was an immigrant from Mexico, from Durango, Mexico. My father is Native American. His family's from the New Mexico, Texas area. And yeah, I grew up with, I grew up sharing a room with 3 other girls and had a really interesting home life. Yeah, so that's kind of where it all started for me in the Southwest.
Cool, cool. So tell me, growing up, did you hear stories, that your parents shared? Like, what was life growing up for them?
Yeah, so my parents had somewhat similar but different experiences growing up. My mother was kind of left at a year and a half up in northern Mexico with her grandmother and her aunts and uncles because her parents couldn't take care of her. So she grew up over there without her parents. I think she went to school up until 6th grade and then stopped going to school. And then decided that maybe at like 16 didn't want to be over there anymore, and then they brought her down to El Paso and brought her into the U.S. And then so she grew up very poor, really kind of poor and impoverished place as a child and a young person. My father grew up in El Paso. He was taken away from his mom when he was pretty young, him and his brother, and then grew up with his father. My father went to school up until the 9th grade. He tells us stories about, he used to live in the 2nd Ward in El Paso, which is kind of one of the roughest spots in El Paso. Talks about walking to school every day and having to fight on his way to school, and I guess at some point him and his brother got tired, so they just dropped out. So my father went to school up until 9th grade. My dad was a child of the 50s, kind of that was his heyday, so he talks about, I think what drew the line for him was he used to have a ducktail, and they had threatened to cut it off, and I think he never went back to school after that. That's what happened. Yeah.
Did he keep it for long, or?
Yeah, I think he had one. I mean, it was kind of the thing, right? It was the style, right? It was like the 50s style that he had. And so I think, my dad loved rock and roll, loved cars, loved women, loved, his family. Yeah, I have some fond memories of my dad growing up.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of like education and stuff, like I know my dad also he got taken out of school by like third grade or something like that to work on a ranch. But I was wondering like, was there ever times where all of a sudden he was like I know the parents will still be like, you still got to do the homework, like even though like maybe they weren't able to like help out with the assignments, like in elementary. What was that like?
Yeah, so my parents were not able to really help us very much with our homework assignments. So because there was so many of us, and I had siblings who were a little bit older, so they were able to help us more with our assignments than my parents were ever really able to help us. With those, I remember my father reading to us, very vaguely, not very much. But I know the one thing that my father did know and that he did instill was you have to go to college, you have to go to school. And I think because, you know, he wanted something better for us, and he wanted us to finish our education. And he, you know, I think for him, education was kind of that evasive dream for him. I think if he had the opportunity and the privilege to pursue higher education, he probably would have been an engineer or something, because he, as a young person, he ended up going to the Army. And then from there, he came out, and then he was, he worked for civil services. He worked for the military base as a heavy-duty mechanic, and so he fixed diesel engines, he fixed tanks, and really big trucks and stuff like that for the military. And was one of their best mechanics that they had while he was there, and retired from there.
Wow. Did he ever encourage like the military, or was he like, oh no, don't worry about like joining, just focus on school? Or
Yeah, he didn't encourage it for the girls, definitely for my brother. So my brother kind of followed in his footsteps and then went to the Army when he graduated from high school as well. Got training, also became a mechanic. My brother actually ended up working his last job before he fell ill with kidney disease. He was fixing engines for a big company called Wartzilla, so he was fixing engines on barges. So he kind of took it like to the next level, right, of what my dad had done. But you know, it's interesting, right, growing up in a Latino household on the Southwest, there's a lot of kind of gender roles, right, in terms of like what you're expected to do and not do. So one of the things for women was not to go to the military, right? So it wasn't something that was ever encouraged or ever even something that we talked about. One of my sisters wanted to go to the Air Force, and actually she was strongly discouraged from going and never made it to the Air Force.
we'll continue this right after this quick break.
Need to grab breakfast or lunch on the
They
run?
have us write
Visit
down
Carl's
what
Jr.
time
in
we
USU,
played
the little
commercial.
place with the big tape.
Long Beach State's very own Carpenter Performing Arts Center has officially released the 2018 through 2019 Arts for Life program, featuring the Bob Cole Conservatory of Music concert series and many more free activities. Come savor the smooth sounds of the Symphonic Jazz Orchestra, or feast your ears on a live rendition of Hamlet and Shakespeare Aloud. Visit www.carpenterarts.org/Arts for Life to view all of the program's schedule. All programs are free and open to the public, however advanced
One
reservations are
commercial, one
recommended.
public service announcement, and then one promo from somebody else's show.
Hi, I'm Natalie Valderas, and if you're interested in stories and media messages, tune into my show Behind the Narrative, Tuesdays at 5 p.m. We will break apart media objects from music videos to advertising campaigns in an attempt to understand the messages behind the content we consume. What elements best tell the story? Why do audiences react the way they do? We'll be asking these questions and more to get behind the narrative.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Golden Spotlight. I'm your host, Rob Flores, and remember that every episode of the Golden Spotlight, if you would like to check out previous episodes, interviews, and so forth, you can go to robfloresmedia.com. Again, ladies and gentlemen, 22S Radio broadcasts live from California State University, Long Beach. So, we're back here with my guest, and going back to the conversation, you were mentioning that your brother got to join the armed forces. But going back to like elementary, did you guys get to have classes together?
No, we were all in different classes, different ages. So we were in the same schools. So I have a younger sister who's a year and a half. She's 1.5 years younger than I am. We're 18 months apart. So we were in elementary together, and then I think in middle school for a little bit, and then in high school.
And then, so going from like middle school, elementary to like middle school, did you have any, what was like your earlier interests?
So I was really interested in, so I learned sign language at about 11 years old. My front door neighbor was learning American Sign Language. She was studying deaf ed at the University of Texas at El Paso and needed somebody to practice with. So she pulled me aside, and then I began to learn sign language. So my father used to take me to classes at the community college where I developed that skill, and later actually became a certified interpreter in Texas and worked there as an interpreter and here in California as well. And I played the saxophone, so I loved music. I played the saxophone all throughout. I think I started in elementary. I don't remember anymore. From elementary to junior high to high school. So I had also received a full ride to Sul Ross University on a music scholarship, and I let it go. So those were some of my early interests, were kind of music, languages.
Cool, cool. Which brings me to the next question. And in high school, everybody has that one subject that like it was like their least favorite or they struggled with the most. What was that like for you in high school?
I think for me the hardest one that I struggled the most with was history, and I think it was because it was so bad. I remember having a PE coach who was our history teacher and just literally had us read from the textbook. And I just remember not learning anything and being really bored. And so I think I came out of high school with not an appreciation of history, and actually like a bad taste in my mouth about history. It wasn't until college that I realized how much my experience could have been better, right? And how important history really is for Latinos and Native American people. So I think it was interesting. So it wasn't until I went into college that I realized that.
So in the movies, this is a new question I've kind of started, but you know how in the movies, on TV shows, you see like in high school, you had the rockers on like one table, had the athletic ones on one. Yeah. Did you like associate with a particular group during lunch?
Oh my God, that's so funny. So me and my sister were the rockers for sure. So they're kind of not outcasts, but a little bit edgy, and we were smoking cigarettes and we shouldn't have been, listening to music, and that was probably the group that I associated with the most.
Cool. So cool that you were learning sign language already, like early on.
Yeah.
I also hear stories about like how I remember I had an assignment where I forgot what exactly was it. I think I was doing one assignment where I was like trying to research like the importance of like being bilingual and stuff. Did your parents like emphasize like, oh, like you should only like speak Spanish at home, or like try to watch some Spanish or something like that?
Yeah, so we grew up fully bilingual. So my mother didn't speak hardly any English, right? When we were kids, and my father spoke English and Spanish, and we had this really great lady who used to take care of us who didn't speak any English at all. So we kind of, what you call later as code switching, right? We went back from English to Spanish really easily. And I remember my mother telling us to speak either English or Spanish, but not to mix the both English and Spanish, which just seemed really difficult for us, because I think my brain operated in English and Spanish from the time that I was very young, which I'm grateful for now, right? But yeah, so we grew up speaking both English and Spanish on the border.
Yeah, it was very fascinating. Like I was amazed to hear like there was, I guess, stories of like people that like when they went in the earlier generations, they actually got in trouble if they were like speak like a different language instead of English in class. Like they'd get detention just for, you know, that was like, wow.
Yeah, we fortunately, I think because we were so close to the Mexico border, that everybody spoke Spanish, right? And so we had our teachers, some of our teachers spoke Spanish in elementary. We had Spanish classes, so they taught us how to read and write Spanish at a really young age. I think it was maybe around 3rd grade, right, when you start learning how to actually write in English. They were teaching us simultaneously how to write in Spanish and how to read in Spanish. So it wasn't discouraged, at least not where I grew up. It wasn't.
And tell us about the differences too from Texas and California growing up.
Yeah, so I think I had a unique experience growing up in Texas, right? In El Paso, in terms of diversity, there really wasn't any diversity where I grew up. I grew up in a predominantly Mexican-American community where there were very few white people and definitely almost no black folks there, right? So it was really mostly Mexican-American and Chicanos. My dad used to say he was a Chicano. You know, my mom was from Mexico, so we grew up with this identity of being Mexican-American. And so, so it was really interesting. And we all spoke Spanish. All my classmates, my siblings, everybody I knew spoke Spanish. I didn't come to California until I was in my late 20s, mid to late 20s. And I think what I realized early on, and it seems really naive, is that when I moved I ended up moving from El Paso to Austin and then from Austin to LA, to Long Beach, is that I thought everybody was Mexican American or was from Mexico, and then realized, oh no, there's people from South America here, and there's people from Central America, and there's people from all over, and not kind of realizing like maybe how small my world was in a sense, right? And hadn't been exposed to people from Central and South America and other countries, but typically I was just only exposed to people from Mexico and the U.S.
Cool. So, growing up, like, I know that in high school, some debate that either junior year or senior year is the most stressful. But what was it like for you? And like, did you get to participate in like the big events like prom and all that stuff?
Yeah, so I think for me the most stressful was my senior year, which was just leaving high school. I think I was just so done with it. I think I went to one prom and it wasn't even my prom. I was working already, I think as a junior, and as a senior, I think I missed my high school graduation because I was working. And then one of my teachers told me that I wasn't going to graduate because of a class, and I believed them, and then I didn't go. It's really kind of ridiculous. So my first actual graduation that I ever had was when I graduated from Dominguez Hills here in California. And so, yeah, that was kind of my experience. I think senior year was probably the most difficult for me.
Senior year, eventually some students reach the point where they're like, you know, what's next? What school do I want to go to? What's going to be my major? What do I want to be? What was that like for you?
So I think for us, as much as my father talked about college, they really weren't able to help us navigate college, right? They didn't know anything about financial aid. They didn't know anything about college applications. They just didn't understand college, right? I mean, he went to 9th grade, my mom went to 6th grade. So for as much as I wanted to go to college, it just didn't happen for me right away. My sister and I had both talked about going to UT Austin together, so she actually ended up going to UT and I stayed back. So I actually eventually ended up having children at a really young age and then kind of took the long road to education. And then now I'm here.
So, you go to different schools. Do you know anybody? What is it like your first day? Like, are you overwhelmed? You're like, I don't know anybody.
Where, in college?
Yes.
Yeah, so, when I was in El Paso, I started up going to community college, right? I think I'd had my first kid maybe. I was young, I was 20. And then, so I went to the community college for a while, took a class here, took a class there. And then moved to Austin and then took a class here, took a class there. By that time I had 2 kids. And then came to California, and then I went to LBCC for a little bit, and then went to Dominguez. And once I graduated from Dominguez, like that was it. I did that. I did my Master's of Science at CSULB in Assistive Technology and Human Services. And then now I'm doing my doctorate at USC in organizational change and leadership, and looking at the intersection of disability and race as it pertains to educational attainment in the US. And so I just needed to finish, right? I think once I finally finished, then I was able to go on and really just kind of hit the ground running since. So I'm still in school. I'll be done next year.
Cool. So, I know that many students are always curious, especially high schoolers. What is the difference between the different types of colleges, you know, from the level of community to Cal State to the, what is it, the UCs, the private schools, all that stuff?
So I think, community college I think is a great place for folks to start, for young people to start. You can get your gen eds there. I just think in California, the attrition rates are really bad. I think it's like 80% or something attrition. I think only maybe 20% to 25% of students who start at a community college finish a community college, right? So if you look at the statistics about who's at the community colleges, especially here in California, or in Southern California, those are Latino students, African American students, students of color, right? And so those attrition rates are pretty bad. But I think if you stick it out and you get your gen eds and then you go to a 4-year, then I think it's kind of where then you begin to focus more on topics that you're interested in, right? So for me, it was human services, which is what I studied at Dominguez Hills. And then I think going on to your master's is definitely much more intense, much more of a commitment, and requires a lot of discipline. And so I went to public school from the time that I was young up until I graduated from my master's, and now I'm at USC, which has been quite a difference. So I think if I compare USC to the Cal States in terms of resources and the way that they carry their students through, I would say that there's a pretty significant difference. And I think much of it has to do with resources.
And for most students, you know, there are some students that they'll go to class and they'll go straight home, but then, you know, there's so many options on school. There's clubs, there's student government. Did you get to, you know, get involved on campus?
I didn't, and I didn't because I was a non-traditional student, right? I had 2 kids, I worked 2 and 3 jobs, and I went to school. I went to school at nights, mostly in the evenings is when I got my degrees. So it was really difficult for me to participate in any student activities. I really always wanted to. It was kind of my one thing, like I wish to have had that real college experience, but as a kind of young working mom, single mom with 2 kids, trying to get to college, trying to work, put food on the table, it was almost impossible to have that experience. So yeah.
We'll be right back for this quick break.
Affordable, professional, and located on the 2nd floor of the USU. Electric Hair has all of your nail and hair needs covered. For an appointment, call 562-958-4522. That's 562-958-4522.
Every day, 40 kids are diagnosed with cancer in the U.S., and only 3 new treatments have been FDA approved since the 1970s. Wow, 30 years! That's where With Purpose comes in. With Purpose is a youth-led movement dedicated to making sure kids with cancer have access to safe and effective treatment options. We need more treatments for kids. They should have the chance to live the life they were given. For more information, visit facebook.com/withpurposelb.
Classic, enjoy the best classic hits with the Even Richard Stevens. Songs from the 60s, 70s, and 80s that made it on the charts are great classic hits. And there are thousands of songs to choose from, sometimes fast, and sometimes these songs are pretty and slow that touch your heart and soul. Even Richard Stevens. Classic hits at the beach. Now 2 hours on Mondays from 3 to 5 p.m.
Growing up, I was a huge wrestling fan. I'm still a kid at heart right now. And, well, what you may not know is wrestlers are also, you know, comedians, actors, and more. And I'll tell you all about it
Tune in every Thursday at 10 a.m. to Beyond the Ropes.
I remember my friend who
22
plays
West
radio.
Awesome.
He goes, "Why are you playing your own commercial?"
Why not?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Golden Spotlight, broadcasting live on 22S Radio, located at California State University, Long Beach. And I'm back here with my guest. So, tell us about the names of like each of the different degrees that you ended up achieving.
Yeah, so I received my Bachelor's of Art in Human Services from Dominguez Hills. Then I went on to receive my Master's of Science in Assistive Technology Studies and Human Services, which is, so for folks who don't know what assistive technology is, it's technologies that people with disabilities use to be able to mitigate the effects of disability. And it had a human services and human development component to it as well. And then I'm now currently pursuing my Doctor of Education at the University of Southern California in Organizational Change and Leadership.
Cool. I know that, another question that's always on students' minds is, how can I afford, like, school? Especially, I think they say that, like, financial aid covers up to, like, the BA, and then anything after, like, you gotta, like, pay. Like, what are the options that people have?
Yeah, so I think it's, it's difficult, right? Because once you finish your bachelor's and your master's and your doctorate, it's all loans or scholarships. So I would say look for scholarships. I would say think about education as an investment in yourself. Don't be afraid to do it. I think it's the best thing I've ever done in terms of an investment. For students with disabilities or people with disabilities, there's a really great resource called the California Department of Rehabilitation, which pays for tuition and fees for students with disabilities in the state of California. Actually, it's a federal program, so it exists all over the country. But they pay for tuition, books, supplies, transportation, licensures, anything that you need to accomplish your degrees. And people can actually utilize them up until they get their doctorates. For me, I did financial aid for as long as I could, and then ended up having some debt, right, which I had to incur for that and for my doctorate program.
Cool. And so after, let's see, there's so many questions I like to ask my guests. So when did you know, like, the exact field you wanted? Like that was like your moment that you're like, aha.
So I don't know that there was an aha moment per se, right? I think I had dreamed about being a jazz musician for a long time growing up as a young person. And then kind of my life, my trajectory changed, and I think it changed when I had my two kids, because early on when they were in elementary, I discovered that they both had learning disabilities, pretty significant learning disabilities. So it just so happened that I was working at the University of Texas at El Paso at their Disabled Student Services office as a coordinator. And it was kind of really my first not real job, but I think for me felt like a really important job. And so it just so happened that at the same time that I was learning my kids had a disability, I was working to help college students on campus with their disabilities, right? And so my life just kind of took that road, right? Because as a parent, you have to advocate for your kids in order to receive services. And so I learned early on that, and I learned through kind of really through other women who were professionals and who knew about special education and knew about services, who taught me, took me under their wings and said, hey, this is how you do it, right? This is how you advocate for services. This is what's available. Don't let the schools tell you this. Don't let the schools tell you that. This is what you do. This is how you stand up for your kids. And so that's what I did. And then my life's journey and my professional career just ended up being in the field of disabilities. And so I attribute that to my children, right? Because what do they say? It's like the personal is political, right? And so for me, this really personal journey also became a journey around, what do we need to do to help people with disabilities, right? There's other parents like myself, there's other children with disabilities. How do we make a change, right? In society, how do we make a change in our schools, etc. And so, yeah, so my life just kind of, my professional life took off in the world of disability. So I've been doing disability rights work for the last right around 24, 25 years.
Yeah, I remember I was in community college for quite some time. And I remember struggling with certain classes that I had like to do. And it's like courses that were like creative and courses that were like maybe with electronics, like I did fine. But things I had to do like solving equations and stuff, like I was struggling a bit. And I remember it was almost at the point where like when I would go to family outings or go with friends, like I felt bad because like it would never fail that eventually like the topic will come and say, how come you're still in community college? Or so and so already has their degree. Like what's taking you so long? And like my self-esteem will like go down and I'd be like, I'm not going to this family thing this year, I'm not this, and I was just feeling really, really down, and it was tough for a while. And then I remember one professor, he said that it's always helpful to go and try to get tested. You never know. He ended up going at like graduate school to like get tested.
Oh, yeah.
And so he learned late that he had something. And so I took that advice and I ended up getting tested, and I found out, oh, so that's why I'm terrible at math and stuff.
Oh,
And so like after a lot of years, they were like, I guess every school has their own thing where like you write a letter and like they have your transcripts and they're like, okay, well he finished this and this. Literally that's all he needed. And this paperwork here shows, yep, this explains why he can't pass those classes. So this documentation, okay, we'll let him have his AA and he can now move on to the next, goal in life and stuff. I didn't know about these things at first, like it was really something like to like learn about disabilities and stuff, and it's never too late to go and find out and stuff.
Yeah, a lot of people don't know right away, right? And I think there's so much stigma attached to disability, right? What does it mean? And like even your family asking you and you feeling like embarrassed about it, right? Maybe at some point you didn't know what was happening and then you found out what was happening, and even then, right? It's not always something easy to talk about. I think when you're maybe if you have a physical disability and it's much more evident and you can see it, right? It's not such a secret, but when you can't explain what's happening, right? Or people can't see, like people keep wondering what's wrong with you, or what's happening, like why are you still doing this, or why can't you do that, or people attribute kind of the lack of, or what they think should be progress or success, to being lazy or not being motivated, and not really understanding that our educational systems are not set up to really serve the needs of students with disabilities, right? And so it takes students longer. For example, it even takes students in high school longer to finish, and the law is structured in a way that it allows students to go to high school up until the age of 22 if you have a disability. So when they were writing the federal laws, they knew, right, that students would much likely not be able to finish by the age of 22. Many do, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of students who don't, and they need that extra time, right? And so that happens also in college as well, is that students need extra time, maybe can't go full time, need to go part-time because they've got to study more, right? They've got to do more work almost than a student who might not have a disability.
And so one of the other things I like to do is I like to ask my guests, so it's a two-part question. It's what would you like your legacy to be?
I think I would like my legacy to be that I was a person who did good for her community, right? That I was a person who cared about other people, and that my work reflected that, right? Which I think leads me to where I'm at now, because really my whole purpose of being at Cal State Long Beach in this position is to ensure that students with disabilities are able to have equal access to education so that they can then kind of not have to live a life of poverty, right? So it's really kind of, my work is so related to the eradication of poverty. And so I look at my work through a social justice lens, right? Because as a researcher and a scholar, like I've studied poverty, and we see that poverty and disability are inextricable, right? And so again, here we go to the personalist political, right? So I think about my kids, right? And like, what do I want for my kids and my family, right? And so for me, then it becomes this very kind of deep and personal work about wanting to help students and help people with disabilities achieve at their capacity, right? And because what we see is that educational attainment rates for people with disabilities are lower than those of people without disabilities. We see the unemployment rates of people with disabilities at 2 and 3 times higher than that of people without disabilities. We see poverty rates much higher than that of people without disabilities, right? So what does that mean in terms of what my responsibility is, right? At least I feel a personal responsibility in my life to use my intellect and my experience and my skills to help students be successful and to kind of really forward that work, to help eradicate poverty and to help people in communities of color really kind of rise up out of poverty through education.
The other part of the question, where do you see yourself after retirement?
Oh wow, I haven't even thought about retirement. I feel like I'll be working for a really long time. I feel like if I'm not working this university or another university, I'll be writing. I'll be doing research. I'm not sure, maybe I can write and do research like on this really fabulous island or somewhere really beautiful. You know, I don't know. I don't even think about retirement at this point. There's so much work to do. So yeah.
Cool. So the other thing I like to do is, I always like to think that we never know who could be listening, and chances are that there's maybe a high schooler or something like that, and chances are the particular guest that's listening right now is saying, oh my gosh, this is exactly the type of field I want to get into. They got the degree that I specifically want. How do I get to where they're at today?
I would say, so for me, it was kind of the opposite, right? Again, a non-traditional way is that I built my experience first and then my education, right? And so I think that I was really blessed to work around people who I think saw potential in me and who encouraged me. And so I think for me, it was really about doing work that was meaningful, number one, right? Work that was deeply meaningful, doing work that was personal for me. And then figuring out because I didn't know right away where I was going to end up or what I was going to do, right? But I knew that I had to take this somewhere else, somewhere bigger, somewhere else, right? Where I could do bigger things and impact more people. So I think it was always keeping in mind that my ultimate goal was to help people, right? And how do I do that? How do I impact the most people with my work? And so I think always kind of keeping in mind, one, that education, at least for me, is important, and I hope that it is for other folks as well. Not giving up, right? There was times when I had to take a semester off or I just couldn't go to school or things happened, but I always went back, and even if it was 1 class or 2 classes, and I talk to other people, other women, other single moms, and I tell them don't give up, because in 5 years either you take a class and you move forward, because those years are going to pass either way. Either you stay in the same spot or you move forward. Some people will move forward quicker, finish their education. Some of us, it'll just take us a little bit longer, but it's okay. So it's really not giving up, right? And then just kind of figuring out where you see yourself in the world, So I think for me, my first entry into the professional world, that was the most meaningful job for me in the beginning, was working at a DSS office up in UTEP in El Paso. And so kind of for me, this is coming full circle. Now I'm back at a DSS office, but now as a director, now in California, now 20 years later, right? My kids are grown. So it's actually pretty cool. It has its challenges, but it's pretty amazing. I think definitely been rewarding so far. I've only been on for 5 months, but I know that things are going to go well, and I have faith that that really the purpose behind my work and what drives me will help me to be a good leader.
Cool. And now tell us about your duties and what DSS is all about here.
So DSS here, DSS is our Disabled Student Services Office. We'll actually be moving in January to the Bob Murphy Access Center with a really generous donor by the name of Bob Murphy, who donated, I think, $1.6 million to the university to build PH2, rebuild PH2. And so we'll be on the first floor. We're going to have a universally designed state-of-the-art building for students with disabilities, which is kind of cool because if you think about it, people with disabilities always kind of end up getting the not so great stuff. They're not always kind of on the forefront of people's minds, and so it's going to be really awesome to have the newest, most state-of-the-art building that's going to be in part dedicated to people with disabilities or students with disabilities on campus. So we provide an array of services. I have a really great and dedicated team on campus, and they provide all kinds of services. We have our Stephen Benson program or learning disability program that identifies students with learning disabilities on campus who have already been matriculated into Cal State Long Beach and suspect they might have a learning disability or have a history. They do testing, they identify, they assess, identify, and then we provide services. We have our deaf and hard of hearing program where we provide interpreters and closed captioners to students with disabilities on campus. We have our support services and emotional and support service animals program. So you'll see a lot of students with animals on campus, and that's because they either have a service animal or an emotional support animal. Many of those emotional support animals come through our office, right? So the students can take them into the class, into housing, etc. We have a life project, which is for students who are on the autism spectrum. And it's a program that really helps integrate students, help teach them more about socialization, gives them like a group and a place to be with other students who maybe have similar experiences. It's a really great program that we have for those students. And then we have a Workability Program, which is a Workability 4, which helps students. It's connected with our career services and is a collaboration between California State Long Beach and the Department of Rehabilitation, where we help students who are in their junior and senior years get ready for work, help them find internships, help them with their interviews, hook them up with employers, all kinds of really great stuff to get folks working. Let me think, am I forgetting any other programs? We have, yes, our Accessible Instructional Materials Center, or the AIM Center, which is a really fantastic component of our department. It is not at Brotman Hall. I think it's called the LA building. And they turn all of the, if somebody needs something in Braille, they will turn textbooks, journals, anything, you name it, into alternative media. They help professors ensure that their work is accessible to students with disabilities. They do ebooks, they do all kinds of really great stuff. There's a ton of assistive technology in the AIM Center. We've got a bunch of computers and technology for our students with disabilities so that they can have access to what they need while they're on campus. So yeah, that's a little bit about what we do.
Yes, Kurzweil.
Kurzweil, Kurzweil, It's a great program. Mm-hmm.
I remember when I first got it, I was like, how cool are robots reading to me? And you could choose the voice and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I mean, it helps students. So Kurzweil helps students who have visual impairments, students with learning disabilities, students who might have a type of cognitive deficit from perhaps a traumatic brain injury or something. So that's one of the programs that we have. They have WordQ, we have Dragon, we have Zoom Text. We've got a Braille embosser. We've got all kinds of really great stuff happening up in the AIM Center.
Cool. So what about any upcoming events? Do you have any events coming up?
So we don't specifically. It is National Disability Employment Month, or National Disability Employment, National Disability Employment Month. Happening right now. Like I said, I've only been here 5 months, so I'm just kind of getting my grounding. I didn't come from another university. I was working at Disability Rights California for 16 years, which is a civil rights law firm. So I came from outside of a campus environment into here. So I've been kind of in the midst of reorganizing DSS, looking at how do we restructure it, make our programs flow better, do things differently, etc. So yeah.
Cool. Once again, can you tell us about that program you mentioned that helps you with like paying for your
tuition?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the California Department of Rehabilitation. I really want to encourage, I feel like it's the best kept secret for people with disabilities in the state. So if you go to dor.ca.gov, you will find that they are the state program that is responsible for helping people with disabilities get back into employment, right? And so how they do that is by providing training and or employment services to people with disabilities. And so what that means is that if you are a person with a disability and you have the ability and the capacity, the desire, and the interest to go to college, right? To be a lawyer, to be a teacher, to be a computer scientist, as long as you can get into college, as long as there's a job market in that field, and you become eligible for the department, they can pay for all of your tuition, fees, books, transportation, you name it. The regulations clearly say that you don't, as an eligible client of the department, you're prohibited from putting any money towards the department, towards your educational services. So what that means is that you have to apply for financial aid and utilize the FAFSA route, go the FAFSA route, and then you use your Pell Grants and Cal Grants, but you don't have to get in debt by taking out any loans. And so that's the beauty of it, right? Is that it allows people with disabilities to obtain their education without going into student debt. And so if anybody wants to know about it, you can come to our office at Brotman Hall in room 270. Our workability folks can hook students up with the Department of Rehabilitation, or just visit www.dor.ca.gov.
And then also, that's another question I always ask my guests. Midterms and finals have always been, the scary time for a student. Tell us about, the strategies that you use to succeed. Any tips for midterms and finals?
For me, oh my God, I think it's preparation, right? So I don't have to do midterms anymore. I'm writing a dissertation. But when I did, I think and what I've learned is really it's about preparation, right? Taking time to have done the work before you take that test, so that you're not scrambling at the last minute. I know it could be really stressful for students, and students got really busy lives. They're working, they've got families they support, they're traveling, commuting back and forth to school, but really, I think being disciplined, I think the earlier you learn to be a disciplined person, all around, right? In your academic life, in your personal life, I think the better you'll be for it. And so I think as you go on with your graduate degrees or graduate degree, you'll find that it's probably one of the most important things that you'll learn is to be a disciplined person.
I was wondering, when you came from Texas to California, was there any food stories?
Food stories, oh my God, let me think. So I'll tell you some of the things I don't eat in California. Is I typically don't eat enchiladas because, I'll only eat my mother's enchiladas because she makes chile from scratch, and so do I. So restaurants don't typically make chile from scratch, red chile. What else? So Tex-Mex, I think I ate a lot of Tex-Mex food growing up in El Paso, right, which is a combination of Texas and Mexican food, just like it sounds. So I think coming here has been great because I've been able to discover a lot of different types of foods. Right? Like I love little Ethiopia. I love Ethiopian food, Mediterranean food, Indian food. So it's kind of cool being here.
Cool. Once again, how can our audience contact you?
Yeah, so if you want to contact me, again, I'm the director of DSS here at Cal State Long Beach. And you can just call our office at 562-985-5401 if you have any questions. If you want to learn more about, if you're a student and you feel like you might have a learning disability, you should just come by and see us. You can ask for somebody at the Stephen Benson program, or say that you want to make an appointment to talk to somebody. Just come by. Yeah, that's how you find me. You can find me on LinkedIn. Just look up Carmen Varela. Carmen, and that's Varela, V as in Victor, Arela.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here on the Golden Spotlight.
Thank you.